Alright, so magandang araw sa ating lahat, and then muli tayong nagbabalik sa panabago nating topic, which is all about the evolution, no? At alam naman natin sa evolution, no? Ano bang meaning ng evolution, no? I-direct forward na natin sa panabago nating topic. Ito po siya, no? So, evolution is any process of change through time, no? Or sabihin natin, parang sa Pokemon, from small, or yun nga, from small, no? Nag-evolve siya. And then sa evolving process niya, nagbabago yung kanyang physical character, or yung kanyang either yung kanyang physical composition or yung mga armors na maaaring mag-upgrade sa kanya despite of this kind of organism, no? Parang sa Pokemon din naman yan, no? So nag-evolve at nag-evolve, no? So sa evolution, nagkakaroon ng pagbabago dun sa particular na species or organism, or sa isang Pokemon yan, di ba po? And then in biology, this is the gradual change of structure and function of organisms due to the changes in the environment. The theory of evolution, no, proposes that the simple forms of organisms gave rise to the present more complex forms of life. The Earth, or not the Earth, no, that the biological diversity or biodiversity that is seen on Earth today is because of evolution. Proceed tayo dito sa genetic diversity, at isa siya sa type ng biodiversity. Sa susunod nating lesson, encounter natin ito. But at this moment, in genetic diversity, there is a very high level of genetic variation within almost all species, including humans. No two individuals have the same DNA sequence with the exception of identical twin or clone, no? Pero tandaan natin, ewan ko sa clone na, but I think meron silang similarities. Pero sa identical twins or sa mga magkambal, sabihin man natin na parehas sila, parehas yung DNA sequence nila, but tatandaan natin in the field of forensic science, in terms of their thumb marks or thumbprints, no, magkakaiba sila. Mayroon silang differences pagdating dun sa thumb mark nila, or kapag nag-thumbprint sila dun, may mga differences pa rin talaga sila. Just hindi naman totally as a different with each other, but may mga counting differences. Importante, meron pa rin silang differences sa isa't isa. This genetic variation contributes to phenotypic variation, that is diversity in the outward appearance. Tandaan natin, phenotype, out yung mismong physical appearance niya, and also the behavior of individuals of the same species. So in this figure, it shows you children all belonging to the species of Homo sapiens. Hindi lang naman mga bata, kundi pati rin tayo mga tao, di ba? And then tayo ay isang halimbawa ng Homo sapiens, no? Tayo as a human being or human person. You will observe that no two individuals in this image look alike in the physical features, no? And then in terms of divergence, species evolved along different paths from a common ancestor. All living species differ from one another. In some cases, these differences are subtle, but while in other cases, the differences are dramatic. In the modern scheme of classification, similar species are grouped into genera, similar genera into families, and so on, no? Kung alam niyo yung taxonomy, no, sa sequencing nila, no? And then this hierarchy of relationship produces a tree-like pattern, no, which implies a process of splitting and divergence of common ancestor. In-apply natin dito yung phylogenetic tree, no? Ayan, yung sa magandang halimbawa dyan. And then in terms of adaptation, organisms must adapt to their environment to survive. Living organisms have morphological, biochemical, and behavioral features that make them well adapted for life in the environments in which they are usually found. For example, the hollow bones and feathers of birds that enable them to fly, or the cryptic coloration that allows many organisms to hide from the predators. These features may give them appearance that were designed for them to live in a particular environment. Evolutionary biology has demonstrated that adaptation arises through selection acting on genetic variation. This figure show you varied examples of adaptation of different organisms, pero ang naipakita ko lang yata is isa, no, I think, no. So just like this example, the cacti or cactus, no, the cacti thrive in arid desert with very scarce water, or nakaka-experience siya ng sobrang kakapusan sa tubig. But these plants are succulent for storing of more water and nutrients. Moreover, these plants are provided with spines, which are not only protective structures against grazers, but also significant to prevent rapid loss of water. Kaya kung bakit may mga tinik-tinik yun. Ito pa pala, meron pa tayong isang example ng adaptation, just like yung the leaf insect show is an example of camouflage, where an organism blends with its environment. This insect blends with its environment in color as well as in appearance to a leaf, including the leaf venation. This kind of adaptation protects the insect from its predator, which increases its survival rate. In adaptive radiation, this is an evolution or modification of ancestral species or structures which was adapted to a particular way of life into many diverse species or kinds of structures, each adapted to a different habitat. The cursorial or walking leg is the ancestral leg which is still present in most insects, just like in the cockroaches. The saltatorial or jumping leg, seen in grasshoppers, the femur and the um, or femur of the hind legs of these insects are enlarged to function for jumping. Next is the fossorial or digging leg, seen in mole crickets or in many subterranean insects. The leg segments are all shortened, thickened, and provided with claws adapted for living under the soil surfaces. The natatorial or swimming leg in the back swimmers or diving beetles possess legs where all leg segments are flattened, adapted for buoyancy in water. Next is the raptorial or grasping leg, no? And as seen in the foreleg of the praying mantis, the femur and tibia are enlarged and are equipped with sharp lateral claws. Next is the pollen baskets. This type of insect leg have leg segments provided with many long hairs where pollen and nectar in flowers. In terms of fossils, fossils are found mineralized remains or impressions of organisms which lived millions of years ago. Many fossils such as trilobites and dinosaurs belong to group that no longer exist in the face of the earth. Conversely, many modern species appear similar to other fossils, yet fossils of the modern species are absent from rocks of corresponding ages. The age of Earth is estimated to be about 4.5 billion years ago, with the earliest bacterial fossils about 3.5 billion years old, fossils from around 540 MYA. Alam niyo po yung MYA, million years ago. What yun po sabihin yun? And then, in the Cambrian period pa yun, shows a diverse assemblage of multicellular cells. Alam niyo naman po ang ibig sabihin ng multicellular, hindi naman cell, multicellular animals. No? Alam niyo naman ang pinagkaiba ng unicellular at multicellular. Simula nung kayo ay grade 7 pa lamang, alam niyo na ito. And then, base sa pagkakita ninyo, ito yung geologic timescale nila, million years ago. Una dyan yung Hadean, then Archean, Proterozoic, Paleozoic, Mesozoic, and Cenozoic, no? So, ayan po yung geologic timescale nila. And then, in terms of mechanisms for evolution, we are still looking for more examples of evolutionary changes in other organisms. We want to know the environmental changes and conditions that trigger the evolutionary changes in different organisms. Biological evolution results from changes over time in the genetic constitution of species. Evolution requires both the production of variation and the spread of some variants that replace others. So, ayun po yan, no? So, next po, in terms of genetic variation, no, it arises through two processes. They are mutation and recombination. Sa mutation, it occurs when DNA is imperfectly copied during replication, leading to a difference between a parent's gene and that of its offspring. Some mutations affect only one bit in the DNA. Others produce rearrangements of large blocks of DNA. And then sa sexual reproduction or recombination, it occurs when genes from two parents are recombined to produce an offspring, which happens in sexual reproduction. Kung natatandaan niyo po yung differences between the asexual and sexual reproduction, alam niyo na po yun. No? So, usually, the two parents belong to the same species, but sometimes, specifically sa bacteria, genes move between more distantly related organisms. The fate of any particular genetic variant depends on the two processes. They are the genetic drift and natural selection. And the genetic drift, they refers to random fluctuations in gene frequency, and its effects are usually seen at the level of DNA. This causes genetic variants to disappear, reducing genetic variations. In natural selection, the principle of natural selection was discovered by Charles Darwin, and it is the process by which organisms become adapted to their environments. Then, in terms of selection occurs when some individuals have genes that code for physical or behavioral features that allow them to harvest more resources, avoid predators, and such relative characteristics to other individuals that do not carry the same genes. The individuals that have these useful features will tend to leave more offspring than the other individuals. So the responsible genes will become more common over time, leading the population as a whole to become better adapted to their environment. No? So, sa speciation, yan. It is the divergence of a distinct species from one ancestor and can no longer interbreed. It is not a separate mechanism but rather a consequence of the preceding mechanisms played out in time and space. No? And then it also occurs when one population splits into two distinct forms that can no longer interbreed. Reproductive isolation does not generally happen in one generation. It may require thousands of generations when, for example, one part of a population becomes geographically separated from the rest and adapts to a new environment. Given time, it is inevitable that two populations that lived apart will diverge by mutation, genetic drift, and selection until eventually their genes are no longer compatible for successful reproduction. So, based po sa pagkakakita ninyo dyan, the changes in the environment and factors such as food availability and competition led to the changes in the Galapagos finches. Those that were able to adapt were naturally selected and continued to live until the present times. Nag-evolve yung kanilang mga beaks, I think beaks nga ba yun, or yung kanilang mga finches or beaks, so I think beaks nga, yung projecting jaws nila. And then sa evidences for evolution, listed below are the pieces of evidences collected by scientists for the theory of evolution. So they are the fossils, DNA sequence, comparative anatomy, and comparative embryology. I think malapit na tayo matapos. So fossils, they are the most observed evidence of evolution based on the array of similarities and differences between living species. Evolutionary biology makes prediction about the features indicate that birds are derived from reptilian ancestors, and thus this data project the possibility that birds were derived from other groups such as the flying insects. Scientists have discovered fossils of bird-like dinosaurs with features, not features but feathers and legs like modern birds, but also have teeth, clawed digits on their forelimbs, and a tailbone like their reptilian ancestor. Then sa DNA sequence, using DNA sequences, biologists quantify the genetic similarities and differences among species in order to determine which species are closely related to one another and which are distantly related, natatandaan natin, ayan, and then makikita natin dito, I hope na nakikita ninyo, so ayun yung codons or yung genetic codes, it's about sequences ng human, chimpanzee, gorilla, rhesus monkey, horse, and then kangaroo. And then sa comparative anatomy, similarity in the structural setup of different groups of organisms is an evidence of evolution. The four legs of frogs, horses, lions, and the arms of the man, flippers of whales, and wings of birds and bats show the same number and arrangement of bones even if external appearances and functions are different. These structures are said to be homologous structures. This indicates that these vertebrates evolved from the common ancestor. So this figure is an example of adaptive gradation in different animals. These show the modification of a common body part of the animal which has adapted to their particular way of living or their environment. This process leads to the diversity of species or kind of structure with each of them adapted to a different habitat. So kung yung nakikita nyo dyan, it is the anatomy of four legs of the flippers of whales, frogs, horses, lions, the arms of a man, and the wings of the bird. So ito na yun, last na, which is yung comparative embryology. Organisms that are different in their mature stages show distinct similarities in their early patterns or early embryonic developmental stages as seen in these figures. This is believed to be a carryover from the developmental pattern of a common ancestor. Evolutionary changes continues to this day, and it will proceed so long as life itself exists. In recent years, many bacterial pathogens have evolved resistance into antibiotics that were used to treat infections, thereby requiring the development of new and more costly treatments. So, ayun lamang po. At dito na po nagtatapos yung lesson natin for the evolution, no? At yung susunod nating topic, it's all about the biodiversity and ecology. At itong lesson na ito, yung sa huli kong nabanggit na sinabi, yung biodiversity and ecology, yun na yung last topic natin for this third grading period before tayo mag-proceed sa fourth grading period. And then, kung meron kayong mga questions, clarifications, or concerns, leave a comment below. And then, that's all for today. Goodbye. Kita-kits po sa susunod na lesson.